It started like most late evenings in the office. Quiet, slower, conversations becoming more personal as the pressure of the day faded. Ethan sat across from a colleague who was unusually animated, leaning forward, speaking faster than usual. There was a glow in his expression, not subtle, not controlled, something intense. "She just gets me," he said, almost without pause. Like instantly. It's weird. Ethan listened, but his attention wasn't on the words, it was on the pattern, the speed, the intensity, the certainty. It had only been a few days, maybe a week, and yet the connection being described sounded deeper than something built over months. "She remembers everything I say," his colleague mentioned casually one day. "And she remembered something I said last week, like exactly." It sounded ideal, almost scripted, the kind of attention most people crave but rarely experience at that level. And that's what made it powerful, because it felt personal, specific, designed. Ethan noticed something else. The conversations weren't just frequent, they were emotionally loaded. Deep topics early, personal details shared quickly, vulnerability introduced without hesitation. It created the illusion of closeness, the feeling that something rare was happening. But Ethan couldn't ignore the timing. Why this fast? Why this intense? Because real connection builds gradually, it stabilizes over time. But this felt like a spike, a sudden elevation without a foundation. And spikes don't sustain, they crash. Still, his colleague didn't see it that way. To him, it felt perfect. And that's what made it effective. Ethan had always believed in a simple idea when it came to relationships. If it feels strong, it must be real. If someone gives attention, it means they care. If the connection is intense, it must be meaningful. That belief had guided how he interpreted people for years, but now it didn't fit. Because what he was seeing didn't match what he understood. The intensity was there, the attention was there, the emotional connection appeared strong, but something underneath felt structured, not natural. He started questioning it quietly. Is intensity the same as connection? That question lingered longer than he expected, because the answer wasn't as simple as it used to be. He thought back to past interactions, moments where something felt right quickly but didn't last, times where attention came easily and disappeared just as quickly. At the time, he had explained it away. Bad timing, different expectations, normal variation. But now, a different possibility emerged. What if intensity isn't a sign of depth, but a tool? That thought didn't feel comfortable, but it felt accurate. And once it entered his mind, it didn't leave. As Ethan continued observing, the situation started to look less like a unique connection and more like a pattern. Not just one person, one interaction, but a type of behavior he had seen before, just not clearly enough to define. There were different expressions of it. The charming one, who gave attention, validation, made you feel seen instantly. The calm one, who stayed emotionally controlled, creating a sense of stability that pulled others in. And the subtle one, who didn't overwhelm, but guided interactions slowly, shaping emotional responses over time. Different styles, same effect, emotional control. Ethan watched his colleague again, now more aware of what he was looking at. The fast bonding, the deep conversations, the constant attention. It wasn't random, it followed a structure, one that created attachment quickly. And that's when it became clear. This isn't connection, it's influence. He glanced briefly toward Daniel, who hadn't moved, as if none of this was new to him, as if he had already seen how these patterns play out, from beginning to end. And for the first time, Ethan didn't just feel uncertainty, he felt recognition.
Ethan didn't bring it up directly, but the pattern stayed with him long enough that it shifted how he saw the situation. Later that evening, the office had quieted down again, the kind of silence where small conversations feel louder than they are. Ethan stood near the glass panel, watching his colleague on the phone, smiling, fully absorbed, completely inside the interaction. Daniel was a few steps away, as usual, still observing. Without turning, he spoke. "They don't connect." A slight pause. "They attach." Ethan's expression tightened just slightly. Because the word attach felt different. It didn't carry warmth, it carried function, something mechanical, something intentional. Connection implies mutual depth. Attachment implies direction, control. Ethan replayed the last few days in his head, the intensity, the speed, the emotional closeness that seemed to form instantly. It didn't feel mutual anymore. It felt structured. This isn't two people building something, he thought. This is one person creating something. And the difference between those two was everything. Once Ethan saw it that way, the entire dynamic changed. This wasn't about love, not in the way most people define it. It wasn't about mutual understanding, shared growth, or emotional depth. It was about something more precise, more controlled. Access, validation, influence. That's what the behavior pointed to. The attention wasn't random, it was targeted. The emotional connection wasn't organic, it was accelerated. The timing wasn't natural, it was intentional. Ethan sat back at his desk, letting the realization settle. This isn't connection, it's control of emotional space. And that control didn't require force, it didn't require obvious manipulation. It just required understanding how people respond to attention, validation, and emotional intensity. Because once someone feels seen, understood, and emotionally engaged, they open up. And once they open up, they become accessible. That's where influence begins. What made it difficult to recognize wasn't the behavior, it was the feeling. It felt real. That's what made it powerful. Ethan watched his colleague again, completely immersed, reacting emotionally to every message, every interaction, and he understood why. Because the brain doesn't distinguish between natural connection and constructed intensity, not immediately. When someone receives consistent attention, emotional validation, and deep conversation in a short period of time, the brain responds chemically. Dopamine increases, creating reward. Oxytocin activates, creating bonding. It feels like closeness, like trust, like something meaningful is forming. But that response is based on stimulus, not necessarily truth. The brain reacts to intensity, not authenticity, Ethan realized. And that's the mechanism. Create enough emotional stimulation and the brain fills in the rest. It labels it as connection, as something real, even when the foundation isn't stable. Ethan started seeing the pattern more clearly now. It wasn't just about giving attention, it was about how that attention was delivered. At the beginning, it was overwhelming, in a way that felt positive. Constant communication, deep interest, personal focus. It created a high, an emotional spike that felt different from normal interactions. But spikes don't sustain, and that's where the shift begins. Ethan had seen this before, just not consciously. The attention that starts intensely doesn't stay consistent. It changes, slightly at first, then more noticeably. And when it does, the person who received that attention feels the difference immediately. Confusion, uncertainty, a subtle drop in emotional stability. And that creates something powerful. The need to regain what was there before. Ethan looked at his colleague again, noticing small signs now, checking the phone more often, slight hesitation in expression, subtle shifts in energy. It had already started. And for the first time, Ethan understood the full pattern. The beginning isn't the connection, it's the setup. As Ethan kept watching, one pattern stood out more clearly than the rest. While one person was becoming more emotionally involved, the other remained unchanged. Same tone, same pace, same emotional distance. No visible shift. That contrast felt subtle at first, but once Ethan saw it, he couldn't ignore it. His colleague was checking his phone more often now, responding faster, thinking more about what to say, adjusting behavior slightly, just enough to keep the interaction smooth. But the other person didn't adjust, didn't lean in the same way, didn't show the same level of emotional investment. And that created imbalance. One person is getting attached, the other isn't, Ethan realized. That's where control begins. Because attachment creates vulnerability. It creates a need, attention, response, consistency. And the one who doesn't feel that need holds the position of control.
Ethan thought about it more deeply. If you don't get emotionally pulled in, you don't lose position. And that's exactly what he was seeing. Emotional detachment wasn't absence, it was advantage. There was another layer beneath it that Ethan hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just about giving attention or withholding it. It was about understanding how the other person responded to it. The strategist type, the Machiavellian, didn't rush, didn't overwhelm. Instead, they observed carefully, quietly. Ethan noticed how certain responses were timed, how messages weren't just frequent, they were placed, how tone shifted depending on the reaction received. It wasn't random, it was adaptive, almost like a feedback system. They're not just interacting, they're studying, Ethan thought. Every reaction provided information. What creates excitement? What creates insecurity? What creates dependency? And once that pattern is understood, behavior can be adjusted to guide it. Not forcefully, not obviously, but precisely. Now that Ethan understood the structure, the sequence became clear. It always started the same way. Strong attention, deep conversation, emotional closeness built quickly. Then, something changed. Not dramatically, just slightly, enough to be felt, but not enough to be clearly identified. A delay in response, a shift in tone, less intensity, more space. And that's when the internal response begins, confusion. Ethan watched it happening in real time, his colleague pausing before replying, rereading messages, thinking more carefully, trying to understand what changed. Did I say something wrong? Why does it feel different? Those questions didn't come from logic, they came from emotional disruption. And that disruption created focus. Now, instead of simply enjoying the interaction, his colleague was trying to restore it. That's when the full mechanism revealed itself. Attention, then withdrawal. Clarity, then confusion. Connection, then distance. And then, just when the uncertainty builds enough, the attention returns. Not fully, not consistently, but enough. Enough to create relief. Enough to reinforce the attachment. Ethan leaned back slightly, watching it unfold with a level of clarity he didn't have before. This isn't random behavior, it's a loop. Because the brain doesn't attach strongest to consistency, it attaches to unpredictability. The emotional highs feel stronger after the lows. The moments of connection feel more valuable after the distance, and over time, that creates something deeper than normal attraction. Dependency. Ethan looked at his colleague again, now fully aware of what he was seeing, the slight tension, the increased attention, the subtle shift in behavior. It had already taken hold. And the most dangerous part was this: it still felt like connection. Ethan didn't interrupt anything. He didn't warn his colleague, not because he didn't care, but because he understood something now. You don't break a pattern from the outside, you have to see it from within. Later that evening, as the office settled into silence again, Ethan stood near the window. Daniel was there, as always, still, unaffected, watching without reacting. After a moment, Daniel spoke. Uncertainty, he paused slightly,
creates attachment faster than consistency. Ethan didn't move, but the sentence hit immediately, because it explained everything he had been watching: the shifts in attention, the emotional highs and lows, the confusion. It wasn't random, it was structure. If everything is stable, there's nothing to chase, Ethan thought. But when something becomes uncertain, when attention isn't guaranteed, when connection feels unstable, the mind starts focusing more, thinking more, wanting more. Not because the connection is deeper, but because it's incomplete, and the human mind is wired to complete what feels unfinished. Ethan started seeing the deeper psychology behind it. Humans don't just seek connection, they seek resolution, closure, emotional stability. And when those things are disrupted, the mind doesn't relax, it intensifies. That's why uncertainty works. It creates tension, and tension creates focus. Ethan thought about it carefully. The more unstable something feels, the more attention it demands, because the brain is trying to make sense of it, trying to restore balance, trying to return to the state that felt good before. That's the trap, because the person doesn't realize they're no longer responding to the other person. They're responding to the feeling, the need to restore it, and that need becomes stronger than the original connection. Now Ethan could see everything with precision. It wasn't just behavior, it was timing. The attention always came at the right moment. The withdrawal always followed just after emotional investment increased. The return always happened when uncertainty peaked. Nothing was random. It was controlled. Ethan watched his colleague again, the slight tension in his face, the way he checked his phone more often now, the way his mood shifted based on responses. It wasn't balanced anymore. It was dependent. He's not responding to her, he's responding to the pattern, Ethan realized. And once that clicked, the entire situation looked different. Not emotional, not romantic, mechanical, structured, predictable. At its core, Ethan understood this wasn't about love, not in the way most people define it. It was about how the brain responds to reward and uncertainty. Consistent attention creates comfort, but inconsistent attention creates addiction, because the brain starts chasing the reward, not the person. That's why the emotional pull feels stronger than normal, not because the connection is deeper, but because the pattern is more stimulating. Ethan leaned back slightly, letting the realization settle fully. This isn't detachment, it's conditioning. A loop built through emotional reinforcement, reward, withdrawal, reward again. And once that loop is established, it becomes difficult to break, not because of the person, but because of how the brain has adapted to the pattern. For the first time, Ethan wasn't confused by it anymore. He understood it, and that understanding was about to change how he responded completely. Ethan didn't interrupt the situation. He didn't step in, didn't warn, didn't try to explain, because now he understood something most people miss. You can't break a pattern by reacting to it emotionally. You break it by stepping outside of it. The next time he saw his colleague checking his phone, waiting for a reply that took slightly longer than before, Ethan didn't feel the urge to analyze the situation for him. Instead, he watched, calm, detached, not cold, but clear. And something became obvious. Every emotional reaction followed the same trigger: delay, silence, slight withdrawal, and then attention again. It wasn't random, it was predictable. Ethan realized something deeper. If you can predict the pattern, you're no longer inside it, because the power of the pattern comes from uncertainty. Once it becomes visible, it loses its intensity. That's when the shift happened inside him. Not emotional, structural. A few days later, the pattern tightened. He could see it clearly now.
His colleague seemed more focused, more invested, more affected by every small interaction. The emotional dependency had increased, and as it did, the control became more subtle. But something else happened too. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, where the dynamic tried to reset, a sudden return of strong attention, more messages, more emotional engagement, just enough to restore the earlier feeling. Ethan recognized it instantly. This is the pull. Not because something changed, but because the system needed to maintain control. When distance creates too much instability, the attention returns. Not fully, not permanently, just enough. And that's what keeps the loop alive. Ethan watched his colleague's reaction, the relief, the shift in mood, the return of focus. It looked like connection, but now Ethan saw it differently. It was reinforcement. By now, the entire structure was clear to Ethan, not just this situation, but the pattern itself, how it begins, how it builds, how it sustains, and more importantly, why it works. Because it doesn't feel like control, it feels like connection. That's the most dangerous part. Control that feels like care is the hardest to recognize, Ethan thought. Because you don't resist care, you move toward it, you trust it, you open yourself to it, and that's exactly what makes the system effective. Ethan understood it now at a level that wasn't just intellectual, it was observational, real, repeatable. Connection isn't defined by intensity, and attention isn't always care. That evening, the office emptied again, same quiet, same stillness. Ethan walked toward the exit, his pace steady, his thoughts clear, not heavy, not emotional, just aware. Daniel was already there. They stood for a moment in silence before stepping outside. The air felt different, not because anything had changed externally, but because Ethan's perception had. Daniel spoke, his voice calm, unchanged. The most dangerous relationships, he paused slightly, feel the most real. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to, because now he understood exactly what that meant, not as a theory, but as a pattern, as something he could see. And once you see it, you can't go back to not seeing it. As he walked forward, one final thought settled inside him, quiet, precise, and permanent. The moment you understand the pattern, you stop confusing control with connection. And from that point on, everything feels different. If this made you see something you couldn't see before, subscribe, because most people never notice the patterns that are controlling them.